Give me just another minute here to see if anyone else joins us. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So just by way of brief introduction, Dr. Betsy Cohen is an analyst member and faculty at the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. Some of her notable publications are the Snow White Syndrome, All About Envy, The Intimate Self-Disclosure, Emmanuel Levinas in Depth Psychology, and Jung's Answer to the Jews. Some of Betsy's current interests in relation to Jungian studies and psychotherapy are ancient wisdom, especially Plato's erotic dialogues and the Song of Songs. But today we will be hearing Betsy talk about Jung's personal confession. And with that, I pass it off to you, Betsy.
Hi, okay. Thanks, Marissa. Welcome all of you. I see some very nice, familiar faces in the audience. Hi, Richard. And I've never met Evelyn. Where is she? But she just was here for a moment. Evelyn Reed. There's Evangeline. Hi. And Dion, thanks for coming. And Gottfried, makes me feel good. And Barbara Seminara, I don't see you, but I see that you're there. And I'm actually using your paper on the Jewish complex. Whose complex is it in my class right now on complexes? So I welcome all of you, and I hope to know you better by the end. And the plan is about 45 minutes of me talking about Jung's personal confession. And then that's sort of half, and then the half is yours, where you'll ask me questions and we'll try to have some discussion because it's a small group, which is positive. Yeah. Okay, here we go. It's the title of the paper, which they're going to all have a copy of the paper, right? Good, because this is just a sort of part of the paper, and the paper's better because it has all the footnotes and the juicy stuff and the bibliography, and you'll hold me to the fire because you'll see that everything I'm saying I've gotten from another source, unless it's my own opinion. Okay, Jung said in 1935, I consider my contribution to psychology to be my subjective confession. It's my personal psychology. Hey, Darren, welcome. Thanks for joining. I see you there behind your name.
Betsy.
Hi. So he also said, we produce lots of documentation so it'll look as if we came upon our notions because of an overwhelming body of evidence, but don't let that fool you for a minute. The fact is, all of this are personal confessions. Every psychology, he said in 1929, has the character of a subjective confession. And Frida Fordham said, Jung was the patient and Toni was the analyst. Mark Sabin said, he wrote a really great book in 2019, Two Souls, Alas. He said, what is clear from the letters between Carl Jung and Sabina Speilrein, Jung became the patient and Sabina the analyst. Beginning thoughts. In my third decade as a Freudian psychoanalytic therapist, which I was for the first 25 years of my work, I read C.G. Jung's Psychology of the Transference, and a light went on. I realized that Jung was willing to dismantle the hierarchy between patient and therapist that was then so important to the Freudian model. Jung understood that Jung, was changed if his patient changed, and the patient means something to him personally. That teaching brought my relationship with my patients to life, and it changed me forever as a therapist. I had permission and encouragement to bring the patient into my inner life as a real person in my psychic family and life. To illustrate his view of the therapeutic process, Jung found a series of medieval drawings depicting a king and queen who as partners, they both disrobe, suggesting symbolically that they learn about one another as equals. As a candidate at the Jung Institute 27 years ago, I learned about the Rosarium drawings, but I wasn't taught anything about Jung's personal life and how he came to the drawings. I wish I had known about it. He knew the drawings, particularly the erotic ones, as he had lived these drawings with patients with women patients who had been his patients in analysis. He discovered an alchemical treatise to make sense of what had been so difficult for him to comprehend, the great mystery of Eros, connection, and profound relationships. He found an archetypal universal source to describe the best of analysis as he saw it. Why do I dedicate time, ardor, effort to understand Jung's love life, his shadow, and what I consider is his fear of vulnerability? Let's go to the source. My father had an affair and he hurt my mother, and they separated when I was 14. Divorced when I was 16. No one knew what that meant then in 1959. My dad continued on with several more women, and I was asked to be the go-between between him and my mother. Perhaps as a result, my brother and I both became analysts. I forgave my father long ago, and Jung too, but forgiveness doesn't negate the desire to understand and learn the truth as I experience it. So, Rosarium drawings. Why did he choose these arcane, sometimes distant drawings to describe the most personal of his theories for how to help our patients heal? And what was his subjective confession behind the Rosarium drawings? That's what we're going to be looking at. These drawings that taught decades of future therapists an ideal to deepen the work with their patients. And we thank him for his passion. I assume his subjective confession is related to his personal experiences with the 3X patients, Sabina Speilrein, perhaps a lesser known woman named Maria Moltzer, and Toni Wolff, who we know a lot about. Jung sought an analogy between the healing power of the transference and these drawings, reasoning that if the analyst wasn't an obstacle to the process, and if the patient were allowed a full range of dreams and fantasies, the patient was more likely to develop an integrated personality. He said this striking statement: everything the doctor discovers and experiences while analyzing the unconscious of the patient coincides in the most remarkable way with the content of these pictures. Could have fooled me. On the other hand, true to Jung's astute ability to change his theoretical thinking, in his epilogue to the opus on transference, I don't think many people know this, he smartly questioned whether they were the only drawings that could describe psychoanalysis. He said, we could easily set up other working models which would display the process of transference, each in a different light. These alchemical drawings must be regarded, get this, as mere experiment. I have no desire to conclude any conclusive significance to it. Okay, so they're one of a possibility of many drawings he could have chosen or other ways of talking about it. I never learned that either. I learned that this was the gold standard, these drawings. The talk today explores the power of Eros in Jung's life with his ex-patients and how it shaped his theory about how we heal in psychoanalysis. I'll guide you through current thinking about the drawings, Jung's shadow, his vulnerabilities, his life with these patients, his views on marriage, all of which are a personal confession. In the longer version of the paper, I present a cogent argument based on letters, research, biographies of these relationships to explain his personal connection, but today I will be brief. If a person considering Jungian analysis, think of this, were to look at these erotic drawings, this person, let's say he's got a name of a therapist. Someone says, oh, Jung's into Rosarium drawings. He looks at these drawings before he calls the therapist. What's he going to see? He's going to see an image of a symbolic individuation process, but he's not necessarily going to know that. 6 are very erotic. Jung knew, quote, that sexual fantasies color the transference, which he said. Intertwined in an embrace in the 5th drawing called the conjunction, the king and queen, they play in the bath, they become one, they create, and they produce something new from their union. Call it what you want, a child, an analytic third. He calls it a homunculus, new insights, new behavior. A prospective patient might muse, what in the world will happen to me when I enter that therapy office? The drawings remain an avenue for erotic aliveness in the psyche. The symbols carry for some the actual experience of being with another person. For Jung, the transference, he had many names for it. It was a conjunction, a chemical combination, the marriage of the archetypal opposites of Sol and Luna, Christ and the church, day and night, the conscious and the unconscious, a frater and soror mystica, a royal wedding, one soul image projected onto another, an internal projection. In modern relational psychoanalysis, which is what I practice, patient and therapist penetrate each other. They share mutuality and vulnerability, and they're deeply influenced by the other. Both are changed by the process, and something new emerges, which is what Jung talks about. In a good analysis, don't we have merger, spiritual sex, the deepest of intimacies? For Jung, the union and the wholeness in these drawings or in the therapy wasn't supposed to be acted out, but it was understood as analogous to the union of opposites. He called it instinct transformed into symbol. The union is about transcendence, whose ultimate outcome is an integration of the patient, he says, with the divine, within and without. Finding this oneness as a state of being is fleeting at best. So just always remember that. It's not going to happen very often. Jung reminded us that these drawings from the Middle Ages are archetypal, not personal. One has to dig under the theory to find Jung's personal equation. He stated that the analyst and patient find a direct confrontation with the demonic forces lurking in the darkness. Well, what demonic forces lurked in the darkness for Jung? He did enter the bath with loved ones. Did he actually contain the opposites with his patients, Sabina, Maria, and Toni? We don't think so. Everyone reading his Psychology of the Transference experiences Jung's symbolic description of analysis in his or her particular way. For some readers, he's heady and intellectual. For others, steamy and alive. Jung said he could understand the transference through this alchemical text. That is, his transference to the text, what the drawings triggered in him. They obviously trigger something different in everybody. I wonder, what is my transference to the alchemical text? Sometimes I feel pushed away and in the dark. I don't think I identify with the royalty of the king and queen. I don't know who does, but anyway, some people probably do. Jung rarely spoke from the personal, with little emphasis on what actually happened between the patient and the analyst. My conjecture is that he felt vulnerability, even though it was probably unconscious for him. Jung had experienced the heat in the drawings with 3 female patients with whom he had affairs. He had a sexual affairs with Toni and probably Maria, and definitely an emotional affair with Sabina. Jung suggested, as you know, a divide between the personal and the impersonal, which was archetypal or objective psyche. But we know now they can't be divided. Robin Brooks, who makes a lot of these seminars happen and can't be here today, she wrote thank you, Robin, that they're not divided, the archetypal and the personal. We understand they're both and, not either or, because we experience the archetypal through our personal lens and from our unique history. And I think Jungians sometimes get confused about that. Analysis is both archetypal and personal, but it's the personal that makes each analysis unique. Archetypal images that I apply to the therapeutic dyad. As an analyst, I experience the vitality of the third drawing called the naked truth. And by the way, these drawings are in the paper if you want to look at the paper later. The naked truth, when my patient and I are without persona, without hiding, without dishonesty, when we're authentic and real as possible, naked to each other's emotional truth. Here's an example. A patient asks me a personal question and I answer with truth, even if the answer is shameful. My assumption is that my non-intrusive transparency offers patients a role model of mutuality, intimacy, and desire, especially if their parents hadn't been curious about them. In the fourth drawing, the naked king and queen descend into the bath, the unconscious, the vessel, the container. There's a deep inner penetration of thought and emotion. In another paper called The Flexible Frame, I describe how the vessel, bath, frame, the container of the therapy is larger than the four walls of the therapist's office. The true frame is the relationship, and this is important, between the patient and the analyst. I try to create a new caring home internally for the patient, a larger vessel or container. Necessary for the patient, particularly who had early childhood trauma or neglect, or who wasn't held in the parent's mind. If the patient is truly angry with me, and I'm not defensive, then more vitality exists than is depicted in the drawing called death. When I make empathic failures or unintentionally hurt someone, we don't repair soon, the therapy can feel like the death drawing. I imagine there are examples of this downtime and misattunement in all analytic relationships. When therapists own how they have disappointed or hurt a patient, healing occurs. And we owe that truth to Heinz Kohut. I believe that in the grip of the work, modern clinicians experience the true person in the couch or chair across from them, rather than an archetypal figure. And I found other analysts to agree with me. One is your guy up there in Seattle, Ladson Hinton. He said, Jung delineates symbolic stages of analysis, but a sense, and I think this is really important, of the everyday struggles of psychotherapy is absent. Jung's emphasis is on the essence, not the gritty, mundane, existential reality of life and therapy. He just doesn't get into that. Jung's shadow, his love affairs with ex-patients, and his fear of vulnerability. Jung's Eros flamed into desire with Sabina, Maria, and Toni. In alchemy, he found a metaphor to stir, contain, and bring his emotional being to these drawings. The symbol came out of his gut. Jung discussed the inherent possibility of falling victim to our shadow, the necessity of shadow work being integrated, and how the shadow teaches us how difficult we truly are. Were his erotic preoccupations destructive to these women? Was he able to know? Most of Jung's vulnerabilities, which I don't have time to get into here, are talked about in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. Let's just say that Jung learned not to put his faith and trust into one woman. partly because I'm not being reductive, but it's partly because of his mother. She had, hospitalized. She was uncanny. She had a split self. The feeling, he said, I associated with women was innate unreliability. That's important in reading all of his thinking. And he called it his handicap. Today, we know that childhood trauma, like Jung personally suffered and endures, is predictive of having to consolidate identity and identity around certainty, being intact by being in control, being one up on others, as well as a fear of vulnerability. These qualities were mirrored by Jung's being a privileged white heterosexual male inflated by his privilege. Difficulties with love. Other than Freud's rejection, Jung's greatest pain and confusion was in the area of love, which was part of the hurt from Freud's rejection. In February 1910, when he knew both Sabina and Maria, he met Toni in September of 1910. He wrote Freud that he, Jung, was torn between the Dionysian and Apollonian ways of being, and he wondered if they should bring monasteries back as a safety measure. I think he would have felt more secure. Jung was remarkably cognizant of his instinct and overwhelm of sexual freedom. In 1910, he wrote Freud, the prerequisite for a good marriage, it seems to me, is the license to be unfaithful. There you have it. For years, Jung traveled a great deal. He had military service, and he didn't have really intense, mutually dependent relationships with patients, nor did he encourage dependency. His career extended from 1900 to 1962, 62 years. In 1926, he wrote Francis Wick's, quote, "Patients eat me," unquote. Because of Jung's being overwhelmed with writing, thinking, and teaching, in his last 30 years, many patients were discouraged from coming to Zurich. And get this, in Jane Wheelwright's first session with Jung, he confided to her, she wasn't yet a mother, that for the past 40 years, he said, I've been listening to mothers and I can't bear it anymore. Why does it matter that Jung was drawn to the Rosarium drawings? Because of his own experience. Well, Mark Sabin, he's a Jungian analyst, he wrote, quote, for Jungian psychology to remain alive and relevant, which is important in the 21st century, it must individuate and transform, just as Jung recommended for the individual. Sabin hopes that, and we all hope, that Jungian concepts don't become encrusted, fixed, or frozen. They need to be continually challenged and explored, and it's one of the reasons I write what I write, and brought into tension with the unknown. When thinking of Jung's concepts, we have to always ask ourselves, what is the experience underlying the concept? Because the concepts change through the 62 years. And I'm teaching right now on complexes, and I gave the students 10 pages of things, different things that Jung said about complexes in 52 years. So nobody can really just say exactly this means this or that means that in Jungian thinking, because it changes throughout the 62-year period. And it's important for us to know this and remember it and try to not even think so much in terms of complexes, but experiences. What's the experience underlying the concept? What's the feeling? Importantly, at the time when Jung was with Sabina, Maria, and Toni, whoops. Is everybody here? Because I just lost you. You are viewing John's iSod screen. Huh. Who's John's iSod screen?
We're here,
Anyway.
but something happened to the share screen. I think Mariska is working with it now. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, and Ruth Williams is joined too. Other people, Lisa and John and Esther. Well, welcome everybody. I should have welcomed all of you. Barbara, Carol, Richard, Dion, Evangeline, Elizabeth, Gottfried, Claudette, Arthur, Barbara, Darren, Allison, Esther, John, Lisa, Ruth. I think that's it, at least that I can see. So I'm glad you're here for this, whatever afternoon, morning, wherever you are, evening. It's important to remember that when Jung was with Sabina, Toni, and Maria, there were no analytic rules or boundaries established. And Jung's relationship with these women is one of the several reasons that we have boundaries today. In his time, analysts were friends, teachers, social friends, and lovers with their patients. Jung's vulnerability and sex for 3 ex-patients. The first we know about is Sabina Speilrein. One place to find Jung's analytic vulnerability and tenderness is in his intimate relationship with Sabina, more than in his theoretical writings about the conjunctio or the Rosarium drawings. Jung's relationship with Sabina scared Freud more than Jung. He wrote Freud about it. In 1911, Freud wrote Jung, "We must never let our poor neurotics drive us crazy." Well, that was too late for Jung. Jung had been Sabina's analyst, and he did discuss with her his skinless vulnerability and his feelings toward her. In 1906, the treatment with Sabina was a year, 04 to 05. She stayed in the hospital and helped out with word association tests and stuff. And in 1906, she came to Jung's office for personal talks for 6 to 8 months, which could be construed as therapy. She wasn't a paid patient, but they were very confidential, except now we know a lot about them now, but their boundaries were blurred, definitely blurred, Sabina and Carl. They were unable to analyze the erotic transference so early in the history of psychoanalysis because they had no theoretical understanding of it. Freud warned against such therapeutic intimacy and believed the feelings of the analyst, as we know, should never enter the therapy. Well, leaving out your feelings creates more anxiety for the analyst or therapist because you have emotions. And if you're telling yourself, don't feel, you're going to be tense. Sabina's erotic transference to Jung, as well as his countertransference to her, decentered him. And in October 1906, he wrote Freud for help, which was the first psychoanalytic appeal for consultation. Jung told Freud in 1909, "I have acted the gentleman toward her. Nevertheless, I don't feel clean. That's what hurts me the most. Until now, I had a totally inadequate idea of my own polygamous components, despite all self-analysis." He missed something important. He said, "Although not succumbing to helpless remorse, I nevertheless deplore the sins." He doesn't have helpless remorse, but he deplores the sins he committed. Imagining I was talking theoretically, but naturally Eros was lurking in the background with Sabina. Thus, I imputed all the wishes and hopes entirely onto my patient without seeing the same thing in myself. So that's a pretty good admission. Jung wrote to Sabina in 1909, "Your letter there's books on this, but I just took a few letters. Your letter made me happy and calm. My own mood swings like a volcano. Your letter was like a ray of sun through the clouds." Sabina wrote her mother in 1908, "that I love him as firmly determined as he loves me. You can do to him and get from him anything you want with love and tenderness." Twice in a row, he became so emotional in my presence that tears just rolled down his face. Can you imagine Jung crying like that with Sabina? It's kind of a nice image. Jung to Sabina, this is a big one. "Give me at this moment something back of the love and patience and unselfishness I was able to give you during the time of your illness. Now I am the sick one. Their roles were reversed. The former patient was requested to act as a therapist. Jung is being vulnerable, though not in the container of the therapy. But he's transparent with the former patient. And we know now that healing enters in when there's vulnerability on both parts. Jung, a victim of himself, was eternally embattled and confused by their relationship. In 1919, he acknowledged his painful journey with her when he wrote her. This was the last letter to her. The love for S for J, Sabina for Jung, made the latter, J, aware of something he had previously only vaguely suspected, namely a power in the unconscious which shapes one's destiny, a power which later led him to the things of greatest importance. The relationship had to be sublimated because otherwise it would have led to delusion and madness, which he said was a concretation of the unconscious. Then the last line, sometimes we must be unworthy to live at all. The tone suggests humility, gratitude, sadness, the sense of a theory that incorporates personal failure. Sabina, having met Jung as a patient in a mental hospital, provided a frame for their relationship that could not be overlooked or overcome. Without the wisdom of what it is to be in the grip of Eros, both benefited and felt damaged by their lack of theory, but neither were ultimately destroyed by it. The analyst who's written a lot about this, he's a Freudian named Zvi Lothane. He's convinced that their relationship was tender, loving, intimate, anguished, intellectual, but not sexually consummated, for whatever that matters. Jung's experience and his countertransference in love with Sabina was early in his career as a psychiatrist. And my contention is when he came upon the Rosarium drawings, he thought, oh my God, he saw an archetypal pattern that manifested in a personal way. He had given Sabina her life back in a transformative process, and he was deeply affected by it. Their two unconsciouses were creating an experience which had to be brought into consciousness. Now we come to Maria Moltzer. She was an RN, and she became a nurse to protest alcohol abuse, and she met Jung while working as a nurse with him in the Bergholzi. Jung was her analyst, and he was also her control analyst. And therefore, he told her, you're an analyst, which is how it happened in those days. Thank God they didn't have to go with the candidates have to go through today. She became an analyst and she opened her own practice in 1913. She was Jung and Franz Rilke's assistant, and she saw a lot of patients that Jung referred to her. She also discussed many theoretical concepts with Jung. And right now, I include it later, but she has a lot of concepts that she helped Jung figure out. And she never got credit. Jung psychoanalyzed 4 important women in his life: Emma, in 1909, his wife, Sabina, Maria, and Toni. In so doing, he created a hierarchy of doctor-patient that we know you can't avoid post-therapy. So the position of expert ran counter to his deep vulnerability with the women. 2 sources indicate that Jung had a sexual affair with Maria. Jung wrote Freud that unlike Freud, Jung had been analyzed. In December 1912, Freud wrote about Jung to Sandor Ferenczi. He said, quote, the master that analyzed Jung could only have been Fräulein Moltzer, as he is so foolish as to be proud of this work of a woman with whom he's having an affair. Furthermore, Yolanda Jacobi, Jung's pupil, remembers, quote, I heard from others, this is all gossip, I heard from others about the time before he met Toni that he had a love affair with that woman there. What was her name? That woman at the Bergholzi, Moltzer. Samdashani writes about that. Before quitting the psychology club In Zurich, Maria and Jung had a long conversation, and she asked him to start thinking seriously and not be sarcastic or ridicule her so much in the meetings. And also, she insisted that he not fraternize with his patients. But he believed that friendships and socializing with his patients was, quote, harmless intercourse, unquote. Maria, unlike Jung, believed these interactions were harmful to the patient who was emotionally intimate with Jung. She labeled it, quote, incestuous collectivity, unquote. She correctly understood that the patient or ex-patient couldn't feel equal to Jung in simple sociability. However, her pleas failed. Jung became annoyed with her artistic sensibilities and strong opinions. They broke off. She lost, he won. She quit the Zurich Club in 1918 and left Zurich. Enter Toni Wolff. On September 20th, 1910, Toni Wolff's mother brought her oldest daughter, Toni, to see Jung for analysis. Jung was 35, Toni was 22, and he no longer was seeing Sabina as she left she left that same year to go home in Munich, or to study. And then she went to Vienna to be with Freud. It's a whole story. Anyway, Jung discovered that Toni knew more about Greek mythology than Jung did. And that surprised him. Jung and Toni's minds meshed and blended, and this intellectual excitement and companionship lifted her dark spirits, sort of how she got better. In 1912, she wrote in her diary that she would answer Jung's psychological questions, and she could envision an entirely new theory of the psyche. That's what she was aiming for with Jung. Together, they explored mythology, symbols, dreams, and they discovered how dreams were like symbols in mythology. Toni's role changed from patient to study partner. I can imagine Jung and Toni's erotic excitement. They were meant to be together, as he was illuminated by her presence. He found her scholarly and able to grasp his ideas. Jung's mind was more alive when in dialogue. And in his 1925 seminar, he lectured that he could share his thinkings and feeling more freely with a woman because she wasn't an intellectual threat. He did imply that he felt helpless when speaking about feelings and that men didn't like to be helpless and inferior. So he admitted it. And like a man of his times, he wrote the essays and took the credit. Toni Wolff got this little wimpy footnote in one essay. In about 1912, a year after terminating Toni's therapy, Jung explained to Aniela Jaffe that his dreams revealed he was having difficulty emotionally separating from Toni after the therapy ended. He had a nightmare in which he feared losing her in the Swiss Alps. In the dream, a band of singing elves lured Toni into a grotto. Toni sank into the rocks. Jung, fearing losing her forever, forcefully saved her. Another night, he dreamt he had a leg cramp and he feared he would drown in Lake Zurich. Well, he interpreted the leg cramp to mean blocked life energy and creativity. And he decided the dreams were an omen to rekindle his connection with Toni, because he was worried that if he didn't try to reconnect, his life was in danger. He contacted her via letter, and the rest is history. 33 years of closeness, romance, creativity, love, and then deep hurt. Jung chose Toni as his spiritual wife. Jung even justified that if he didn't follow his unconscious wishes, he would hurt his daughter's Eros. I don't know how he got to that, but anyway, he wrote about his feelings towards Toni. Sexuality, he said, as an expression of love is hallowed. If a man acts from love or in the spirit of love, then he serves a God. And whatever he may do is not ours to judge, for it is ennobled. He worked that through. Jung believed he could only find help from a woman outside his marriage. And how he couldn't have felt vulnerable with his new attachment, Toni, is hard to imagine. Toni saved Jung from being swamped by his confrontation with his unconscious. We know about this because he felt in danger of losing his mind. Toni came to his house most days during those years of the confrontation with the unconscious. The housekeeper would let her into the family home. She'd go upstairs to his library where the two of them discussed and analyzed his visions of the night before. She was his helper, his muse, his guide, his intimate friend, and his primary intellectual partner. Without formal training in the first decade of the 1900s, Jung declared Toni a Jungian analyst. And at the peak of her career, she became the second most prominent analyst after Jung in the Jungian community. She served as a senior editor for Jung's works, editing, collating, reworking, even though this goal stifled her career and her creativity, her writing career, not her therapy career. Toni was a dinner guest at the Jung household with Emma and his children for Sunday lunches and had tea with Jung every Wednesday at Toni's mother's house. One tidbit about how Toni was treated in the Jungian community, and you can imagine. When Toni, Emma, and Carl would walk into the Zurich Psychological Club, others attending were both stunned and intimidated. 3 comfortable armchairs awaited them, where the other remaining members sat in older, more uncomfortable wooden chairs. The 3 comfortable chairs with Jung in the middle were only for them, Toni, Jung, and Emma. And if they weren't there, no one sat in those chairs. Flowers were placed on the podium when Emma spoke. She was the chairperson. And when Toni spoke, they were removed. In the 1920s, Toni pleaded with Jung to marry her. It took Toni years of insistence, desire, sadness, despair, until she realized he was committed to the marriage with Emma. And the more she made Jung the center of her world and allowed dependency on him, the more he emotionally withdrew. What does that tell you? Jung does express and reveal his vulnerability, shadow, and truth. In the protocols, which were the books before the MDR, he told Jaffe that he could talk only with Toni Wolff during his dark descent, implying that no one else understood his inner experiences, writings, dreams, visions, fantasies, active imagination. Also in the protocols, Jung expressed that through Toni Wolff, while writing the Red Book, he found his center. Jung's only son, who at 75 corroborated what I'm saying. He acknowledged Toni's benefit to Jung when he said that she more or less saved his father's life and sanity. She was his father's lover and therapist. Jung took his dreams, which were then in the black books, to her. She did active imagination with them, and he later polished them. This was the period between 1913 and 19. They were co-therapists, said Franz Jung. He worked with her dreams and she with his. She was his constant companion, not only Wednesdays and evenings at the apartment and at Jung's house, but he had built Bollingen too, one 2 towers, one for Emma, one for Jung, one for Toni. And they spent a lot of time there. He traveled with her to Ravenna, get this, in 1914, and that was immediately after the birth of Franz's sister, Helene, Jung's 5th child. Jung vacationed frequently with only Toni, and sometimes he went with Toni after a vacation with Emma. So Emma had a lot to contend with. James Kirsch, along with Barbara Hanna, thought Jung, quote, without Toni would have perished in his effort during those years. Toni and Jung's partnership represented the union of the masculine with the sacred feminine, the image of the conjunctio, the royal, sacred, divine marriage that we find in the Rosarium drawings with the king and queen. See how this is coming together? One more thing about the drawings. It's an important one. Drawing 2. The king and queen are holding left hands. At the turn of the century, there was a renewed interest in the medieval practice. It was called a left-handed marriage. It was called a morganatic marriage. A wealthy nobleman was allowed to non-legally marry a woman he loved, maybe of lower rank, and she had no rights over his property. So that's what they had, he and Toni. Jung described it as a spiritual marriage where love is the deciding factor. Jung and Toni Wolff entered into a morganatic marriage, said her biographer, Nan Healy. Thus, my argument concerning Jung's choice of the Rosarium drawing. The second drawing is attributed to Jung's personal and subjective experience. James Kirsch noted that Jung's relationship with Toni carried, quote, his tremendous experience of the conjunctio. It was when he understood the mystical background of sexuality. As Joseph Henderson remarked about Toni and Emma, Jung found two wives. But as the left-handed marriage indicates, Jung never intended to legally marry Toni. Later regrets. Maybe a little more. Later regrets. Thank you for your patience. One can only imagine how painful the relationship was for Toni. She did not have a socially respectable role in the community, and she lived more of an interior than outer life. Many were jealous of her special relationship, but it left her tense and often irritable, especially when the three of them were together. Jung, not surprisingly, thought the problems of the three of them were for the women to work out. Get that? Because he wanted them to analyze each other's dreams. And he found his colleague, C.A. Meyer, to be their therapist. And for years, they went to therapy together, Toni and Emma, and analyzed their dreams with C.A. Meyer. Toni's ego was more fragile than Sabina or Maria's. She was less worldly. She never moved away from her family home, and she dined nightly with her mother, who died in 1940. She tended to deny her own life, travel, or promotion of her ideas in favor of Jung's. The more she committed herself to his exploration of the psyche, the more he ignored her and the lonelier she became. In 1944, Jung, at age 69, was hospitalized for a medical crisis, and Emma didn't let Toni visit. When he returned home from the hospital, he discontinued his Wednesday visits to Toni's home, and she no longer was invited to their Sunday meals. But I think the final blow for her came in 1948, after Toni's 36 years of devotion to the psychology club. Jung said he didn't want anyone too introverted on the board of the Institute. She was shocked and crushed to be omitted. She was more depressed. She became more depressed, sour, bitter, and gray. She was prone to heavy drinking and smoking, and because she already had arthritis and rheumatism, she died alone in her room in 1953, having given her life to Jung. You should pause at that. In an interview in 1959 with the guy Miguel Serrano, Jung described a love that was the center of his soul. The love, he said, was both archetypal and eternal because it united a man with his soul. He said that woman has been dead for 8 years. It was actually 6 years Toni had been gone, but he said, Toni, he didn't say her name, but she embodied for him the essence of the alchemical conjunctio. a union never destined for marriage, he said, in this world, which would rest eternally in the memory of the soul. So if you read my whole paper, I have a lot that I say about Jung's 1925 essay, Marriage is a Psychological Relationship, where he completely justifies his relationship with Toni and why Emma is who she is and Toni is who she is. He doesn't use their names, but it's very clear. So Jung experienced personal healing in his relationships with Sabina and Toni, and he learned that healing, thank God he learned this, came from the relationship. And Toni helped him metabolize his overwhelming material and embodied his vulnerability. And in conclusion, I'll say love is overwhelming. And with the enormity of erotic projections onto him, Jung handled it pretty well, I believe. Today, he would have lost his medical license, but his involvement with love with his former patients is a major reason we have boundary violations today. And in the early history of psychoanalysis, several analysts had sex with their patients. They didn't understand the power of transference, countertransference, but we have learned, thank God, from their errors. We thank them for their struggles. We have witnessed how human Jung was. We know many suffered for years, and yet we don't forget the existing vitality, Eros. The end. Thank you.
That was great, Betsy.
Thanks, Ross.
Do you want to pause at all, or do you want to just move into questions?
I'm okay. Do people want to break? It's up to you guys.
All right, we'll move into questions. Carol, would you like to ask your question? You can put it in the chat or unmute.
Thanks. Thanks. I'm so pleased to hear this because I actually cited you, Dr. Cohen, in my book that I published
Really?
just last year in Routledge on projection. I also cited Barbara Miller, and I'm excited to see her here too.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but Jung had this image after his heart attack. He had a kind of a vision. And the vision, he talked about it as his soulmate. I thought he was talking about Emma. Can you clarify that?
He actually was very, very distraught after Emma died, but he was not. He said he had a polygamous nature,
Right.
so we can say he had more than one image of soul projected onto a woman. I mean, we know he had it for Toni. It wasn't as clear with Emma. He sort of used her in many, many ways to run the household and take care of the kids, but he realized after he died that she had been fundamental for him.
Yes.
Maybe when after the heart attack, he saw it too. But I don't have, maybe someone else. Gottfried?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I'm a bit taken aback by, I mean, I'm aware that, of course, I'm speaking as a man, and at the beginning of your paper, you let us into some of your own personal family history. I am surprised how apologetic you were for Jung on Jung's terms. I mean, when you quote him just a moment ago, he had a polygamous nature. He was a macho male sexist,
Right.
and
Right.
And he acted as one. And the Rosarium, as wonderful as it truly is, speaks of mutuality, inequality, which by the way, I think he experienced previously in 1908 with Otto Gross. It was not just the Rosarium. His analysis with Otto Gross was at times a mutual analysis. He writes, when I become tired, he analyzes me and I gather a lot from it. And the way the women that, from my perspective, I would say he exploited, you said, like Maria Moltzer, she didn't get much credit. He suppressed giving her an equal place. A question I have is that, mentioning the Rosarium, and you also mentioned your study of the Song of Songs and other ancient erotic texts, I find it quite shocking in a way, the way Jung comments on the sexual intercourse images. He writes something along the lines of, oh, no, you must not see them as pornographic. I mean, the person who looks at them, you must see them as symbolic. And I've always felt that for Jung, it's almost as if there was nothing in between. There is no lovemaking. And there is certainly no lovemaking between equals. And I feel from today's perspective, I think you avoided the term abuse. He exploited and abused all the women that you mentioned. And they suffered painfully from that.
You don't think that it was implied?
Very, very gently towards Jung, yes, but I feel you were extremely apologetic. I mean, when you quote Jung as saying, well, I've got a polygamous nature, I mean, most of the male population in our patriarchal society would say, oh, sorry, I can't help it. I've got a polygamous nature. That is not enough anymore, I feel.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm like trying to work through the anger that I felt, because as a candidate, I was very angry because I wasn't taught any of this. And so,
Of course not,
I mean,
no.
I didn't learn about it. Yeah, I didn't learn about his racism. I didn't learn about his anti-Semitism. Oh, and so my whole career has been coming to try to research these aspects of him and try to find some kind of forgiveness and acceptance of the guy. And also, I think, you know, to publish a paper in my journal, Jung Journal, I don't think I could say that Jung was abusive. I don't know. I just don't think we go there yet.
Pity for the journal.
Pardon?
It's a great pity for the journal that it's
Yeah, I
that
don't
they
know.
would
I
not
could talk to
publish
the editor.
that they would not publish the word abuse of with him as a perpetrator.
Okay.
And Maria,
Well, you know what? I also want.
I didn't know the quotation that you gave from Maria Moltzer, and I was, in a most positive sense, taken aback when you said already in 1918 she took him up on his incestuous relationship with patients.
Well, she didn't like that he was socializing at the psychological club with these people that were like, you know, they felt one down to him. They were his patients, and he was pretending they were all, yeah. So but she was against that, and he didn't like that.
But I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think in the quotation that I'm grateful that you used it from Maria Moltzer, she did use the word incestuous
Yes,
towards Jung.
incestuous
And
right.
already in 1918, I mean, this is not in the year 2000, this is 1918. And I think it's amazing. I feel like taking my hat off to her.
Well, I have to say that the people at my institute, they know that I'm very angry with Jung because I just write one article after another exposing things about him that I didn't learn as a candidate. And I have to go a little easy. And I'm sorry I didn't use the word abuse, but to me, it's obvious, but I didn't use the word abuse. I mean, I'd like to make him sound like Trump, but I don't, because I also have a respect for him. And I also want to announce to everybody here that if you're interested in Otto Gross, we have at our group today, Gottfried is the foremost authority on Otto Gross and Jung. I've read all of your papers, Gottfried, about Gross, and he's an unknown figure in Jung's history and a very important one. And I recommend all of you read Gottfried's work because we just don't learn about this in our training. These are dark time, dark periods partly. Jung, he is difficult, okay? I tried to explain it in the best terms I could, that he's had huge, humongous problems and he hurt people. He definitely hurt people. I made it really clear he hurt Toni. I don't know how much he hurt Sabina, but he definitely hurt Toni. So thank you for pointing that out, that I didn't use the word abuse. You could write that paper, Gottfried.
Barbara Miller, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of weave into this because you've mentioned the Jung Journal, the last issue. There is the end of, I think, over books. Paul Bishop is talking about, and I could go get it to get the name, but it starts with a K. And so in this same period, this Dr. K, who was also at the Psychological Club, left the circle. He told Jung that he could not support how Jung was behaving at the Psychological Club. That was provoking people. And Jung was saying to Mr. K or Dr. K, that this was, his way to get the individuation, going. And, Mr. K just said, no, you just don't do that, But then he left the circle. But I think it's also very important, adds to your research too, that there actually were complaints.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Claudette, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank Dr. Cohen. I enjoyed your talk very, very much because sort of like you, though I guess I'm less forgiving of Jung, but I love him. And yet I'm so disappointed in so much that he did. But I guess as a sort of a follower of Andrew Samuels, I find myself more interested in, not so much in attacking him, though I've been accused of doing that, but more in using him against himself, like that whole argument that Andrew makes. Anyway, and my particular interest is in the field of gender and sex stuff. So for me, what really bothers me the most is how Jung's model is so heterosexist, and how most Jungians continue in this fantasy that there is such a thing as masculine and feminine and all that crap.
Right.
And I just wondered, what your thoughts about that are, and kind of
a travesty, because people have really been hurt by that. And by the way, I don't love Jung. And so,
okay.
I mean, I was Freudian for 25 years. I don't consider I'm Jungian, I'm relational psychoanalyst. I don't call myself Jungian, except I got in to do this talk because I study him. But and I'm part of the Jung Institute, but I definitely would say I love this man because he hurt too many people from my taste. And but you just don't say that at our institute, okay, Claudette? You just don't talk that way. So let's see. He clearly, look at all the people that grew up with these rigid views of masculine and feminine. It just hurt them. It still does. And I'm very impressed with this woman, Marieke. She's trans. She's in our IAJS. And anybody who speaks up against this, I'm just impressed with that person. And, you know, some people think that you can't criticize Jung because he was a man of his times and this is what he knew. But I don't feel that, especially that he started out pro-Hitler. You know, there's certain things to me that are unacceptable. And his apology was pretty minor. And he helped a lot of people get out. I know all this. He helped a lot of people get out of Germany, etc. However, there's so many things about the guy that aren't impressive to me. So,
But why do you think?
Good, you go ahead.
Why do you think so many Jungians are still sort of stuck in the same model? Like even when you talk about the alchemical images, it's a very heterosexual model, however you interpret it. And Jungians seem like determined no matter what they say, and no matter what Jung said too. I mean, Jung often claimed that he wasn't talking about men and women. He was talking about this principle, whatever it's supposed to be, this masculine and feminine stuff. But Jungian still seems stuck in it. It just seems like that no matter what gets written by, like the late Lynn Cohen, who wrote so many wonderful stuff about this, it's like it just sort of gets, oh yeah, that's good, and then they keep doing the same old thing. Why do you think Jungians are so stuck in that model?
I don't think I'm a good person to ask about Jungians because I'm just not that identified so much as Jungians because of what I just talked to you about.
Yeah.
So maybe other people could talk about why they think that Jungians are so stuck in the heterosexual model. Does anybody have a thought on it, Evangeline? Or
I mean, I think gender essentialism is built into Jungian theory, so it requires like a very intense deconstruction of all of Jungian thought, especially when it becomes like shaped by his personal history and his personal confession and his views of women and experiences with women, right? Like you're not just you're disrupting Jung's like entire personal narrative that we've kind of been working with for years, and really having to admit, like, why do we follow that? Like, why do we study this man? Why do we study this person who's abusive and manipulative and ethically very questionable? Like, I think it's hard to like separate our own attachment there, because then we have to critically question ourselves and why we bother with this. So
I thought it was because he brought God in. Go ahead, Evangeline. So? I thought so. I don't know. What? Evangeline?
I was just going to say something, but I think I've almost forgotten it. I don't consider myself a Jungian or a feminist or anything like that. I feel very fortunate in a way not to have been associated with a school. And I still study Jung. And part of my journey a huge part of it has been to find my voice as myself, which it forces me to engage with and the argument against certain aspects of Jung or anybody else for that matter, that I have to find my own response. And I don't use the word anima or animus working with patients because I'm working with their material, their dream material. So if they are working with a dream of a woman, we talk about a woman, without having to put the label, oh, this is an anima figure.
Am I saying anything?
Yes, it's good.
I don't like labeling people as abusers or offenders. And you know, believe me, I've worked in prison populations and with very difficult situations. But anytime there's a label, I find it interferes with the healing dialogue, labeling. So I commend you, Betsy, for staying in a difficult situation and continuing the healing dialogue without name calling. Thank you.
Jung, Levinas calls it totalizing.
Mm.
When you know, label a person and diagnose
Exactly.
them and put them in a box, and then
Exactly.
that's what they are.
Yes.
Anyway, I was chicken. So that's the answer to Gottfried's question. I was scared.
Mm.
Does anybody else have a question? Barbara?
I could say a little bit more about Maria Moltzer, because
Okay.
she comes from the Netherlands,
Right.
right? And I'm in the Netherlands. And her family were the, you know, you talked that she was against the, she was against alcohol. Well, her family, they were the big distilled
Right.
alcohol bowls, BOLS,
Right.
just as big as Heineken. And you can imagine that was her background. So she was probably escaping by going to Switzerland. The other thing that has struck me from other people who have studied Maria Moltzer, because I have a woman here who has asked a lot, because she's been asked by the Maria Moltzer family to do a book on Maria Moltzer. So I've been speaking with her and what she's found. And in terms of, let's say, you know, using it a strong word, you know, the women being destroyed in their relationships with Jung, I think that Maria's, you can say, was in that category. She was writing a book. She published it more or less, but she never could find her bearings, it seems. And she suffered terribly, and she was very alone at the end of her life.
Just like Toni.
Yeah, that's why I thought I'd share it. And I think we have some more from.
I think Arthur, before Gottfried, I see you came off mute, Arthur.
Yes, I would like to come back to the abuser. If we label somebody as abuser, maybe one thing, but I think sometimes it is important to just use clear words. And I think it is actually compensatory for this other attitude that many Jungians have in our own organization as well, that Jung is treated as almost a saint who could not do anything wrong. So actually, rather than playing it down, I think it needs a really clear statement that, because that's what it was. And you can't even say man of the time, because you know, not every man at that time treated women in the same way and with so little respect. And I think a lot of it, yes, we can of course say how it helped Jung to develop his theories, but you can also call it a big rationalization.
Yeah, I agree.
Gottfried?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, Evangeline, whether you were implicitly criticizing me for putting Jung in a box. I have no interest in putting Jung in a box. I don't think that I've used the word abuser. I am missing word terms like abuse, just as I'm missing as Barbara was just so helpfully saying, and really, really movingly so, thank you, these women were destroyed. That's not labeling Jung as a destroyer. It's just a counterpoint to all, as Arthur was just saying, to all the rationalizations of Jung himself, which were quoted. I have a polygamous instinct. If it's love, then that it's sacred. No matter how many women I love at the same time, no matter what happens to the women, no matter whether they are destroyed in the course of this. This is me, 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 me. And that is a very highly criticizable patriarchal attitude, which is not honoring women as equals, which I believe there was just, sorry, I have one question. Yes, Claudette, do you not see a kind of equality between the king and the queen in the Rosarium? I mean, the Rosarium is the basis for mutuality and equality, and
Right,
I've always seen that aspect of the king and queen,
it's
the two as men and women, of course, as equals. Do you not find that?
if you're heterosexual, I'm sure that would strike you. But if you're a lesbian, as I am, that's a meaningless combination. It's like it gets me stuck in this masculine, feminine stuff that I don't
Sure.
believe in. So
Yes.
it's not that's not helpful that way.
Sorry, thank you very much. Yes, of course I understand that. Yes, I can see that.
If I can just come back, Godfrey, I think my point is that the dynamics of patriarchy certainly need to be articulated. And I'm quite sure personally that I would probably have found Jung a bit of a pain in the butt on many occasions, and I would have to argue with him or maneuver or whatever I have to do, rather than just be squashed by his ideas or his style. Or so it's not that I have you on a pedestal by any means, in any shape or form. And I have been enlivened and nourished by his work. I'm just trying always to stay away from labels, as you mentioned, Betsy, the totalizing of labeling. That upsets me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, did anybody label him in tonight?
Sorry?
Did anybody label Jung tonight?
I thought I heard
as you keep speaking about labeling.
I thought I heard you use the word abuser. Or okay, maybe I'm wrong, but I did think I heard labeling. I apologize if I misheard, but I do hear it a lot. He was a this and a that and the other.
I did use the word, the term abuse, just as Barbara used the word destroyed.
Yes.
And I think both are highly appropriate.
Yes, I don't have a problem with that. I thought I had abuser. Yes. No, I don't have a problem with labeling abuse. It's been part of my professional development.
Well, if there's no more questions, we can move on. If people want, I mean, I hope you learned something. I learned things from talking to you after, so thank you for that. I learned from Barbara and Angeline and Carol and Gottfried and Claudette, Arthur, and Reese. So thank
Diane,
you.
did you have a comment?
Did you say my name?
Mhm.
Oh, hi. Yes, I just had a a reflection that, I mean, it's very fascinating. I'm really, really grateful for this conversation. Yeah, especially as I'm beginning. I mean, I'm a first year candidate, and this is, you know, to bring the complexity of Jung. I mean, we haven't had much of that complexity exposed.
You're
yet.
not going to either.
Well, you did a little bit, Betsy.
I know, but come on. Look how long this has taken.
Right. So, but I was struck by one thing that was when you were talking about the dreams that Jung had about you know, the leg cramp in the lake and saving Toni in the Alps, and how he made sense of them as that was giving him indication that he should go ahead and reconnect with Toni.
I know, but
I
that
thought that
completely
was
pissed me off. It's horrible because it was just a rationalization.
well, yeah, yes, I was thinking that that's what
He
would be
could have
quite.
anything. He wanted her. So he says these dreams, and oh, look at that. This is how I'm
Right.
interpreting them. These dreams mean I should be with her. So, I mean, she didn't even get the benefit of terminating. I don't know. I just was annoyed that he used
And-
those dreams
Yeah,
to
I thought
rationalize
this is,
desire.
right, exactly. That's exactly what I thought, and that's the benefit of consultation and of
Yeah. Therapy.
maybe it wouldn't be so bad that we would die in a dream. I mean, that he
And
missed
also
that
a therapist
opportunity to
might have
die.
said to him, do you think the dream, sorry?
That he missed
Right,
that
if we died.
opportunity to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, could have died. Also, a therapist might have said to him, could this be anything else? Could this dream mean anything else? I mean,
Right.
he had it all, they didn't. So, yeah, I'm glad you were annoyed with that too.
I would think of that as being very reductive towards soul process. Very reductive to put those
Yeah.
soul interpretations on top of something like that. Are you going to say some more about the Song of Solomon, Betsy?
Oh. Well, I'm currently writing a novel and I don't have a agent or a publisher. And so it might never see the time of day, but in the novel, the protagonist, who's a therapist, she studies the Song of Songs. And I study the Song of Songs. I mean, I've given talks on it. I've written a paper on it. I've just never published that particular paper. But I see a connection between the Song of Solomon and the best of therapies. And then the whole paper goes on to explain how. But I really like the idea of the images in the Song of Songs and a comfort with those images in therapy, because I think that Eros is the mover and the shaker of a good analysis. And if we're comfortable with the images in the Song of Songs, we're going to feel more comfortable if we feel erotic toward our patients. And I just see a connection. He talks in the Bible, it talks about in the mother's house. The woman wants to bring the lover to the mother's house. There's all this conflict and shame. And it's just the most beautiful to me of erotic poems. But in the novel, she gives a talk on the Song of Songs, and her patient, who has a mad crush on her and vice versa, goes and hears the talk. And it's erotic, I hope.
Beautiful.
So.
Oh, I hope you continue with it. Please do.
Okay, thank you.
Aminata?
Yes, thank you. Hello, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. My question is, we explored the relationship Jung had with women, but we rarely talk about relationships he had with men. So for example, you
He
know,
had very bad relationships with men. He had many breakups. He couldn't keep close friends. He was very competitive. It'd be
exactly.
a good
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Thinking about Gross, you know, how he disappeared. I don't know, maybe Gottfried can say something more about it.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I don't want to derail the discussion. I think in his relationship with Otto Gross, Jung reacted almost like a spurned lover. Jung broke off the treatment. Otto Gross broke off the treatment with Jung because he had found out that Jung was in close contact with Gross's father, whose aim was for Jung to declare Gross, sorry, an unhealable schizophrenic who would spend the rest of his life in an institution. That was Otto Gross's father's aim, and he wanted to use Jung for that diagnosis. And appropriately, Otto Gross fled over the wall of the Burghölzli, although he could also have walked out through the front door. He was a patient by his free will, and Jung, even in 1934, Jung still wrote a very, very angry letter about Gross that I don't know what became of him after our analysis. I think he only interacted with the lowliest people, artists and bohemians and that kind of crap. And I don't know, he died then sometimes. This was before Gross wrote his most important papers between 1910 and 1920, and it's in my book on Otto Gross. Sorry to mention this, but
Oh, go ahead.
No, we only have a couple more minutes. Were there, Betsy, do you have any
Why don't we
closing?
just pray? Let's pray for the souls of those sad women, okay?
Yeah.
Emma? Yeah, Emma really suffered. So Emma, Sabina, who it's too sad to get into a lot of her life, Toni, and Maria. And hope that any great therapists coming our way, that will never happen again. But we know that it just keeps happening. So let's just hope that the more we can explore and expose and write about the underside and the shadow, we'll make some progress.
Yeah, round of applause for you, Betsy.
You have a good day and evening to everybody here, and thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.